Monday evening. I have today a very interesting guest join me today in the studio. I've got to set up a mic for her because it's about a mile away from where it needs to be. Right, so there you go.
Hello, Zed.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Right, Honourable Claudia Webbe. It's good to have you in the studio because we have been doing 2 programs with you before on the Zoom. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same, is it?
And here I am live in your studio.
It's not the same. The body language is not there. The facial expressions are not there. The moments when the eyes are flickering and the lips are moving, it's just not the same. There's like a bit of a delayed reaction on the Zoom, right? But today, it's wonderful to see you after 2 years, I reckon. We've done 2 programs with you on the Zoom.
It's almost 2 years, but of course I got elected in December 2019, and I think you captured me just before that, and you've captured me again.
That's right,
and here I am today, very delighted to speak to you and your audience.
Our audience are now scattered worldwide because now with the internet, everybody's got access to listening to any station in the world.
The power of the internet, and who would have thought it, that everybody needs broadband. And of course, that was a manifesto commitment that I fought on. And, back then, before the pandemic, everybody laughed about free broadband. Even the BBC laughed about free broadband. And here we are. Who would have guessed it? We actually need free broadband so that everybody has access.
Guys, we've been always talking about the digital revolution. And I'm going to ask Claudia later on in the program if she is part of the Swiftie generation, right? And she's talking a lot of digital, so I think she might be. But definitely, what have you been up to then since we last spoke? I see a lot of noise being made in Leicester about some topics that you have been speaking about. I read about the textile issues. I even read about you putting in a motion for an EDM for the cricket. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been a lot of things happening in because of the pandemic. We've had to adjust our lives. We've had to sacrifice a lot. And out of that, what it's highlighted is some severe inequalities. And in Leicester, it's highlighted the impact of those inequalities in terms of in-work poverty. When you've got so many people in Leicester, in my constituency, working, yet they are poor and not really surviving because of the poverty. And what it should have shone light on is the fact that there's been this level of wage exploitation in Leicester's garment industry, sadly, where too many workers were earning way below the minimum wage and still do, despite all of that focus and all of that media focus, despite 10 years of looking at this issue, despite the cameras coming to the city, because of the wrong solutions, we've continued to have the problem where, sadly, the brands that essentially whose garments are being made by the workers are gaining exponential profits while the workers themselves are not being paid even anything close to the minimum wage. It's a scandal that has been ongoing, and too many workers now are suffering. And even with the focus, the bosses, the corporate firms, the owners of those firms, the factories, have found a way to avoid detection by ensuring that on that payslip, the minimum wage is shown, but to the worker, they're still getting way below. Why? Because they're required to give back in cash some of that income that they were provided. So essentially, the bosses go undetected, and the workers are still making garments from which the brands are able to profit exponentially. And that's why I say, the reason why we have billionaires exist because of the exploitation of workers, the working class, essentially. And we know that's true because we can see it here in Leicester.
Of course, who has got the data for this? All these things you have talked about, we've read about them a lot. There have been some Channel 4 investigations where they have gone into factories and they have seen live demonstration of that. But on the other side of the coin, we've also come across cases where some of the workers, they take the less money and then they're also taking the money on universal credit and every single benefit that they can get hold of.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen that in the cases that have come forward to me. One of the reasons why the exploitation is allowed to go on is because no worker has wanted to come forward on the record, give their name and say this is what's happening to them. And the cases of worker exploitation are horrific. There is no chance for workers to even have time to go and claim benefit. I'm talking about workers that are working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. They're working 6 p.m. In the evening. So they're signing on right now to work and then they're finishing work at 6 in the morning. 12-hour shift, 7 days a week, and they're not even getting a wage that is commensurate with that exploitation.
Okay, now let's go back. Let's go back in history here, right, in this city. Let's take it back to the 70s, yeah? Mm-hmm. That's many decades ago, almost 5 decades ago, right? The 70s. And the textile industry has been on an exponential growth period during that time, hasn't it?
Well, right? Leicester's well known for its garment industry.
For its garment industry and the shoes.
Well, it used to be the jewel of the crown. You know, the world was clothed by Leicester in the heydays. From the 1930s onwards, Leicester was the jewel of the crown in terms of the garment industry.
From that period, that's why data is very important to compile to see where we were, where we are today, and where we are likely to be tomorrow. Everything is about data today. And you're now put on the table, not only today, but a year ago, if not longer, that there is an issue here, HISE.
HISE. You
better
tell your readers, your listeners what that is.
Historic, institutional, systemic exploitation, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of HIS, only the last letter is different, right? So there is a lot of that going on, isn't it? Right?
Well, I'm picking up your terminology.
We got to be working fast now.
Historic,
institutional,
systemic, exploitation. Okay.
Right? Now, in order to fix that problem, we need to compile the data. Because here on the radio, we just do everything. We work. We're working right now, you and I. We're not doing an interview. We are doing a working interview.
Sure.
It's different to just doing a chit-chat.
Okay.
We are actually working, you and I. So I don't know if I'm on the payroll, but certainly you are on the payroll right now. So what I'm saying is that historically, we need to go back to the 70s and bring it from there as to how many factories we had each decade right up to today. And the fact that these practices were going on, which is why we call it historic. Now that all those historic issues, if they are continuing, then that becomes institutional.
But we weren't talking about this in the 70s. The first Channel 4 investigation was, of course, in 2010. So 2010, Channel 4 did their investigation, went on the ground, went into factories, exposed the problem. Then, and there was continuous exposures over a period of time.
Is this a problem for the national government or local government? Who's responsible?
In the 70s, of course, we had a manufacturing base here in Leicester as to the rest of the country. So we had a manufacturing base, we had a set of industries really. And the garment industry at that time wasn't making clothes for fast fashion, they were making clothes to last. So I know this because, my mother was a garment worker, her skill set was as a machinist. She was expert at sewing, and she was a home worker in Leicester. So I grew up with the notion of the garment industry, and then it was very clear we were making. My mother was making clothes to last for reputable brands at the time within factories that were unionized. What we're seeing today in terms of Leicester's garment industry is the effect of the deindustrialization that was started by Thatcher and is with us today in terms of the lack of movement from this Conservative Party. It's happened under their watch, and they haven't addressed the problem. Since 2010, when it was at first exposed, they haven't addressed the problem. They've run down these factories so that fast fashion is the model that people are driving workers to slavery over. And actually, in terms of protection, the unions have been, effectively driven out of our factories because of
what's happening here
decimation of the manufacturing
is
base.
This problem that we know about, and we're all responsible for it. We can't only blame the government. All of us who live in those areas, if they know about it, it's just one of many other things that need addressing.
No, this is
right.
The exploitation of workers. I want to put it in its historical context because the exploitation of workers in garment industries is a global problem. We are wearing clothes where the concept of fast fashion has taken hold.
Let us focus on the area where all the factories are. Right. So in Leicester, we have Leicester South, Leicester East, Leicester Northwest. And these are the three predominant areas where
the majority are in Leicester East, in my constituency, without a doubt.
I see that's why your passion for this is running high and you want this solving. But we can only solve this effectively with all the correct data on the table, right? If we have the data on the table, we can address it with the data.
Well, we have to acknowledge what the data is. And if we're not willing to hear that we've had a growth of something called fast fashion, that is driving the agenda in terms of why clothes need to be turned around in quick style and why workers are getting poverty wages, and why actually the garments that are being produced are no longer of the same levels of quality, in my view. And I think the brands will probably disagree with me, but I don't believe that the garments that we are getting today through this fast fashion industry is of the same quality as in the 70s and 60s and 80s.
The quality is a different matter. Let's now stick to the point of the abuse of the workers and so on. So I would say that data is required, has to be compiled. If one Channel 4 interview took place in 2010 and today is 2021 and we are still talking about the same issue, then that means it was not nipped in the bud then, right?
The reality is that we've got significant amount of data over at least 10, 11 years. Whether it's been acted on, there's been 3 parliamentary inquiries, 3 sets of recommendations. None of those recommendations has the government taken on board and implemented. Well, we have a situation where actually the reality is that the kind of worker exploitation that is going on means that workers themselves have no representation. There's not a single garment factory in Leicester that recognises a trade union. What workplace can protect workers if there's no trade union recognition?
Here's a question for you that's come on my little digital screen here, because data is hot now. A question here for you is that, can you please ask Right Honourable Claudia Webbe, I've trained them to say it like that.
Yeah. You just call me the Honourable.
Honourable Claudia Webbe, if she's familiar with antibiotics. It's a trick question. Please ask me some more questions, because that's not enough. Antibiotics. I'm getting a toothache already. So let's wait for that answer to come back, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then I can delve more into that.
Yeah, happy for that. Happy for your caller to expand on the issue of antibiotics and how that connects with the garment industry.
Well, it is replied already, because there's a listener there, very ardent listener. He's on the ball. He's saying that what has happened historically is the government has fed us an antibiotic which has done a temporary fix, which is to keep us all quiet. And the problem is not gone. The toothache is back.
I don't think
the toothache is here still.
I don't think the government
needs a root canal, I think.
I don't think the government has actually presented any solution. What happened when it was highlighted during the pandemic, the response by the government was to send immigration enforcement vans into my constituency. You know, I was getting reports after reports, and I was seeing them for myself, immigration vans going into streets in my constituency as though that was the problem.
It is another interesting...
It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with the so-called illegal immigration. And of course, it was the wrong approach. And what they've done now is that they've tried to coordinate all of the regulatory agencies together to try to do greater levels of inspection. But do you know that since they set up their new regulatory body, they call it the GLAA, there's not been one prosecution of a garment factory. Not one prosecution in this time since they've set up this new regulatory body, gone in, done inspections, whether that be health and safety inspections or wage exploitation inspections. Not one prosecution since they set up that body. I think that is an actual failure of the government's approach. And what they should have done was actually invest more in HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is meant to enforce the minimum wage. And by the way, we haven't even talked about the minimum wage that came in 1997. So when you go back to the 70s, there was no minimum wage regulation. But in 1997, the minimum wage came into force. And since 1997, what we've seen is there's been a failure of the manufacturers, the factories, to give them their shorthand term, a failure to implement the minimum wage. And then there's been a failure since at least a decade of the HMRC to be properly resourced to be able to enforce the payment of the minimum wage. So the GLAA and those regulatory bodies, whether that's the Health and Safety Executive, need to be resourced, invested in, so that they can go into and do greater inspections, so that when a worker comes to me and says that they have to go to work at 6 p.m. in the evening and that they do a 12-hour shift and they don't leave work till 6 in the morning, and their complaint to me, their only complaint to me is not the fact that they're being paid poverty wage, is that they're cold.
So
they are cold overnight.
In your constituency, how many people are there in your constituency in Leicester East, for example? How many total?
Well, the total population is around 80, 90,000.
Okay, so let's say 80 to 90, yeah? Now, from that, would you say is a good 10,000 of them that are working in the garment industry? Well,
the estimates across Leicester is that there are about 10,000 people working in the garment industry. A report by Leicester City Council said that there were about 1,500 factories altogether. They don't know the true figure, but that's what their estimate is. Boohoo recently did an audit of all of its supply chain. Boohoo said recently, after its own investigation, after the exposure, after the problems that Boohoo had, which actually did nothing to their profit margin, by the way. But after all of that, they say that they now, their supply list consists of something like 58 suppliers. So people are asking what happened to the hundreds and thousands of suppliers that they had, because they had the majority share of suppliers. Now that means that something has either gone drastically wrong in that the number of manufacturers that are in Leicester, the garment factory, is either been significantly curtailed.
That means that many of the subcontractors are now diminished. So previously what was happening was there were main contractors and then they subcontracted the work out to a subcontractor. So all that practice has stopped and you have ended up with 58. Now, there's no brownie points for me to defend anybody here, even Boohoo if he's listening, or he or she is listening, that they have followed their practice of business to go for it regardless. Money is the boss, right? And they've been doing this, but collectively this issue has to be sorted. There have to be some milestones listed, and then a delivery has to be monitored on those in a set time. Otherwise, we'll be sat here again next year, right? The Textile Federation, you met the chairman, Mr. Sajjad Khan, last time he joined us here in the studio, on the Zoom.
On the Zoom, yeah.
And he also had brought forward the number of textile factories that are closed down because of the impact of the huge impact Leicester has taken and the number of people who are in the food banks. So these people have lost their jobs. So we have two issues here, haven't we?
Well, I want to be absolutely clear with you, Zed. The closure of the factories haven't led to the food banks. The food banks existed because of poverty wages. So people are working and they are getting poverty wages, and there's been an exponential growth in the food banks. 1 in 2 children in my constituency are in poverty.
Okay, now we're moving into another direction called vulnerability.
If you have so many people working, there shouldn't be the high levels of poverty if they're being paid correctly. But there is a high level of poverty in a constituency where there's a lot of workers. So
where there is vulnerability, there will be exploitation, whether you are in Leicester or you're in Timbuktu or wherever you are.
The rise
it happens.
Well, the rise in food, because you associated it with food poverty and with food bank use. In the UK right now, food bank use has risen since the pandemic by 35%.
Of course it has.
So it's widespread in terms of food bank use. But I want to be absolutely clear that the problem of finding solutions rests with going back to what we had in the 70s, where you had unionized workplaces. And you need to have workers who've got a voice for them. And right now, workers don't have a voice because they don't have any union representation. They don't have any factories that actually recognize a union, and therefore workers don't have people speaking for them. People don't want to come forward and share their problem and bring the problem to their doorstep. And what they say to me is, if we come forward and share this and make it and expose it, who is going to pay us whilst we are going through a year-long investigation for our case? Who is going to pay us to whilst we do that? That is the dilemma for workers. And the problem with the legislation as we have it is that the onus for bringing this to light and addressing it and bringing the people that are exploiting them to boot, the onus is on workers themselves. That shouldn't be how it is. But that is the way it is. The HMRC, which is meant to enforce the minimum wage, say that they cannot act unless workers come forward and tell them what is happening to them. That, to me, is the wrong approach, because workers are not brave enough to come forward and share how and they're being exploited and what they're going through.
You've had a one-to-one with many workers, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Now, I want you to tell me what solutions were implemented and what has been the outcome, because sometimes we can talk here all day long and nothing ever comes out of talking, right? So tell us, you did the PRS, you identified the problem, you showed us the reaction, so did the workers, but what is the solution? Who has implemented a solution to all of this?
So what I'm indicating is this is a solution that is bigger than one factory. So basically, the legislation needs to be changed so that the emphasis isn't on the worker alone to bring forward the case. If a worker in the current process, if a worker bravely comes forward, if they come forward to give their name, their details, to name the factory that is exploiting them, that worker needs support whilst they go through the case in order to expose the case. That means that's financial support, income support whilst they do that. Then we can get these cases to court, and then we can get the action stopped and protection for all of the workers in that particular scenario. Don't get me wrong, there are inspectors going in, there are boohoo inspectors, brand inspectors, all kinds of inspectors going into factories, and they are coming out with basically they can't find the problem. The reality is that on the books, everything looks fine. The minimum wage is shown, the workers' hours are shown, but the reality is what's happening to the worker is behind closed doors, they have to give back the money, half the money back to the boss, and they live in fear. So the worker needs protection and support. Secondly, Every
Look,
factory.
the thing is,
every factory. I'll finish this on. Every factory needs to recognise a union, and furthermore, the issue around how you regulate that. The more onus has to be put on the brands and the retailers themselves, because what factory owners have told me, it is a race to the bottom. That they respond to the brands based on the cheapest price. How can you sell a garment for 6p?
Look, that's another story. What I want to ask you is, have you, or all the people who want to say TFC, time for change, right? What have they done? What have they done to do the DFC, drive for change? What have they done? Have they colluded with all the different associations that exist in Leicester with the council and then go on to the national government, right? To go try to put a policy in place that everyone can adhere to. Have you talked to any of the Leicester traders, Leicester Textile Traders Association?
Yeah, what I've said is that they've formulated an umbrella body which is where they support this new regulatory enforcement called the GLAA. But the problem with that, and that's been going on for a year now, it's been going ever since the summer when this whole problem was first highlighted. The problem with that, and this regulatory body consists of, the umbrella textile organisations, it consists of the HSE, Health and Safety Executive, it consists of even modern day slavery regulators, it consists of HMRC, that regulates the minimum wage. It consists of the fire brigade, and it consists of the police, and it consists of the local authority. And they've been clubbing together, and they've been going out and doing these inspections. But not a single prosecution has arisen from this approach.
So what you're saying, they were all Mickey Mouse inspections?
Therefore, they couldn't find the problem. And furthermore, where they have the evidence, I'm told on CCTV, we've seen it. Since 2017, they had evidence of at least a few factory bosses on CCTV where they have done this trickery of presenting the books clean and then behind closed doors taking money from workers. Even with that evidence, it hasn't led to any prosecution. What I'm doing now, I'm working with the unions, and we're going to try and basically work to build the support with the workers.
Our allocated time for that issue on textiles is run over, so I shall get my wrist slapped on this, right? Because we are here very digital, everything has to work clockwork. So now
what you should do is you should encourage listeners to come forward and talk to you.
Right, guys, listen, you're not sending enough texts in right now. You need to talk to us and tell us more about some of the experiences that you have had in the industry. So I know a lot of the listeners here are in the textile industry. So send us a text on 07748 855 055. Don't be sending them all tomorrow, because Claudia will not be here tomorrow. And I won't be able to forward all your texts to her tomorrow. She has too much on her plate already. Now, another very hot issue going on is the red list. Now, there are thousands of people stuck over there in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and in Pakistan. And they're asking a question. So on behalf of all of these people, some of them have contacted me and even sent me a copy emails that they had sent to you as to how can they get back. They're stuck there for weeks, months, and their family of 4, 5, they can't afford to pay £2,000, and they've had their vaccinations over there, and they can't come into England. They're stuck over there. So what do we do about that?
These arbitrary lists.
Are you listening, BJ? BJ, this one's for you. calling Boris. I don't think he's listening.
These arbitrary lists of whether you are a red list country or an amber country. I mean, the government is making it up as it goes along.
Well, where's the data for it?
Well, we don't know.
Has anyone seen the data? Please send it to me here at the radio, because we saw some data, right? And it was just tiddlywinks. It makes sense that, the facts were clear there as to where all the cases are, right? So if I'm a man of logic, I would say there are more cases in a country that is more populated. Yes? The chances are that the number of people infected there is going to be more than a country that is not so much populated.
Well, if you've noticed in the UK, I don't think the Prime Minister or the government is even concerned about people travelling around with the virus anymore. We are exercising the government is exercising herd immunity. It's been implemented. Whether we like it or not, we're all free to be infected.
Yeah,
and to move around freely. What's happening with the countries, when you compare India to, say, Bangladesh, or India to Pakistan and so on, you see a difference of treatment based on trade relations. So
what you're saying is that it's a financial incentive. The decision is based on some element of cronyism, favoritism, financial issue, right?
I can't think of any other reason why India is not on the red list, yet Pakistan...
So there is 650 MPs. Why have they not made a noise about this? I keep seeing copies of letters going in from sporadic MPs up and down the country, writing in to the ministers, and 2 or 3 weeks later, people are sat there on the other side of the world screaming, scratching their heads.
There is an all-party parliamentary group on Pakistan, for example, and the chair has written on behalf of that all-party parliamentary group to raise this issue about the difference of treatment, for example, with Pakistan vis-a-vis India. This isn't about, obviously, none of this is about an attack on the people. This is about...
Yeah, but you would see how it affects us here. We are a 40 diversity city, Leicester, as are many of the cities in England. Now, what you succeed in doing is you create animosity between one community and another. People, they sit back and they take it, they're having a go at us. Then what you do, you succeed in creating more division.
But of course, you would need to ask a government minister, a Conservative minister, why they do this. And
you've given me an idea. A name comes to mind, Daniel Crew.
Well,
from your Leicester East area.
Know who that is.
He's the new Conservative councillor selected in Hamilton.
This is not a council issue.
It'll be a good practice for him to learn. He's got to do something when he's in the cabinet.
Sure, but one thing that local councillors don't deal with is foreign affairs. The issue is about immigration, foreign affairs. There are there are MPs in Leicestershire who have ministerial responsibility, who you could well ask.
Well, you're already on the case, aren't you? Because some people have written to you
many people
from your area.
Many people are on the case. Obviously, it's a case-by-case scenario. I mean, I've had situations where people have needed to get back to Leicester very quickly, Leicester East very quickly, because they have a relative that is in a life or death situation. There were exemptions for people in life or death situations.
Well, there are many people who are regularly receiving medicines which they can't do because they're not in the country. So for 3 or 4 months, they're stranded in these countries.
If they are in a life or death situation, there are exemptions.
Look, anybody who's on regular medication and he doesn't take his medication because they're not available to him like they were in England, and then you're actually putting him at risk.
So what? No,
right?
I'm not. What I'm really trying to say to you.
Now imagine he's lying on his bed and he's on his deathbed and he's saying, "Oh, Claudia, I'm now nearly dead. Can you do something for me?" Or BJ, and it doesn't work like that. We need to get these people back. It's simple. Bring them back, put them into their homes in isolation, and put them out of a miserable existence. They're 3 months, 4 months. They've been sat there, 6 months even.
So I do want to just make sure that we aren't portraying misinformation here. it's very clear exemptions for people on life or death scenarios. So people can apply and say that they are in a life or death situation and they can be exempted from any conditions and they can get back to the UK if that is the case. So it's not the case that it's a blanket rule for everybody. I want to be absolutely clear.
Well, we'll get back to some of these guys who have sent in a lot of emails, which they've also copied to you, and they should probably have a go at that, what you're saying. Anything is worth a try. When anybody's in that desperate need, they'll try anything.
Yeah,
but
we are a few weeks old now on this issue because, as you can see, the government has opened up the country and basically anybody who's vaccinated can be here. So the information moves very quickly. We are now in a scenario where the country's opened up.
This is a hot topic because I see my text messages are coming. Is that the issue is also the vaccination, because in a country like Pakistan, the vaccine that they use is a Chinese one called Sinovac. And one chap has written that this country does not accept that vaccine. So what's all that about?
I can't comment on that.
Well, neither can I.
This isn't what I've understood.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is better that everybody is vaccinated. The issue that you have is that the UK has gone full steam ahead to ensure that everybody is vaccinated, right down now to 16-year-olds, is what they're trying to open. Let me finish this sentence. So right down to 16-year-olds in terms of opening up the vaccination. What you've got, however, is vaccine nationalism. You've got the UK going after and hoarding vaccines. Meanwhile, 1% of Africa is vaccinated. 1% of Africa is vaccinated. That's inequality, and that's almost vaccine apartheid. And the government is not allowing the basic tools of making the vaccine. They're not allowing that to be shared across poorer nations. And if every country was able to have the vaccine, then we'll be in a better position.
Okay.
We can't live in a vacuum in the UK. We need vaccine equity.
Right. Well, the lights are flashing again on my phone. A lot of text coming in, which we'll discuss afterwards. Right now, another topic here. We're moving on to sports. Our favorite subject, sports. Without sports, we can't do nutrition, health, and well-being, can we?
Well, Zed, you're the expert on sports.
Now, here we are. We have a common friend called Peter Herbert.
Uh-huh.
You familiar with Peter Herbert?
I am, the barrister Peter Herbert.
The barrister Peter Herbert. Now, Peter is well-travelled gentleman. I think his origin is somewhere in I'm not too sure if it's West Africa or West Indies. I'm not too sure. I need to...
It's West Africa.
West Africa is from, yeah? And he's got that distinctive patois accent he has, Peter.
No, he hasn't.
Yes, he's got a bit of patois in him. He must have picked it up while he was a barrister in London. But Peter's a very interesting character because he's at the moment he's working in Kenya and he's in England at the moment. And he shared with us yesterday his experience just going over to France and the number of documents that he needed. And when he got onto the ship eventually, there was hardly anybody there crossing over on the ferry. It was empty. So Peter will be back here next week and he's going to take part here in a charity cricket match, which is with Dr. Bernardo's charity. And he's a very keen sportsman and played cricket himself. And some months back, you were pushing through an EDM in Parliament to gain support for the issue of all the inequalities in sport between the various ethnic communities that are all over England. Again, we have a lot of antibiotics here as well over the last 50 years with this inquiry, that inquiry, and so many different inquiries. So there is definitely a need for a level of equality, because if you have a look at every time, like the BLM, for example, now and previous to that, when we've had race riots and everything, there has been allocation of grounds to the Afro-Caribbean communities throughout England. We have 2 in Leicester, 1 in Nottingham, 1 in Birmingham. In London, we have 2 and 1 we have in Leeds. But isn't that now out of date to say this ground is for this particular community when we have 40 diversities living in the city? These grounds are in the heart of the city. So today we are living in a modern age where every inch of green grass in a city where space is crucial in short supply has to be used by everyone in that community, not only one community, and the gates are locked for 9 months a year. That model is out of date.
I'm not aware of that kind of exclusive use of grounds, whether that's cricket grounds or football grounds and so on. I think you're right in that we live in diverse areas and a diverse city. I think the issue is, however, that when it comes to the issue of exclusion and sport, what we are talking about is effectively certain sports at certain levels excluding the representation of African, Caribbean, Asian faces and other racialized minorities, and that is at board level, that is at the decision making level, and that is at certain elite sports. Let's say for a long time there were no black faces in the England football team, there wasn't certainly any black faces that reflected the diversity of the population and indeed the range of people that played football. So the grassroots football was more diverse than you had in the Premier League and than you had in playing for England. And that has changed over time because there's been campaigns over time that has highlighted it. There's still a problem when it comes to Asian players in football because we don't see Asian players in their representation playing for the England game or playing Premier League. So there's still a long way to go in terms of that diversity.
Well, let's take this city for both of these sports you've just mentioned, football and cricket, right? That we have thousands of young football players from grassroots right up to the age of 20. Thousands of them in each different club and organization. And they don't have the look-in at all to go to that level where they could become semi-professionals or professional. And again, there's a deep study being done with this, which is to share with you, to say, well, look, we got to deal with this collectively as a community, right? I am saying to you that, look, we're living in 40 diversities. Any facility provided to anybody, anywhere in this country today has to be for human beings. It should not be for one of those 40 diversities, because nobody's talked about sustainability here. Those Caribbeans that were allocated grounds 40 years ago, those grounds, who's checking them? What's happening there today? How many members are left? Because there was no sustainable plan there. There's no sustainability. We have to think in a different way now, because we have to think that, well, for the last 20 years, there's been no sustainability, and a sports facility in the city, anywhere in the country, is not it's not a social club. It's partly social, but it cannot be Domino's social club and 30 or 40 members. And then the rest of the community, look at this community, for example, and your community where you are in Leicester East. We need to have shared facilities we should cater for human beings.
Yeah, well, I don't know where you're seeing the lack of shared facilities. I mean, what I'm seeing is that we are in a diverse city and every bit of sporting area needs to be shared. I've not received complaints that we've got exclusivities going on and that facilities aren't being shared. What I'm receiving complaints about is the lack of investment in terms of the infrastructure and the development of those grounds. The reality is, however, is that we've got a lack of investment overall in terms of funding.
I'd like you to look at that timer now, where our look at that timer. We've got 37 seconds left, so I want you to just take 15 seconds over and say your last piece.
Well, there's not much more that I can say except that we're living in a time where we've got inequality going on, and what we need is a change to ensure that we've got everybody working together in unity.
Great.
To impact
now,
on this inequality.
Teamwork, what it's all about. I got a message just now here saying that Claudia has been very kind to you today, Zed. She let you speak. Wow, that's a compliment. So I'm going to tell you all, Jazakallah khair for listening in. We shall catch up on these community matters again. Thank you very much for joining us. Jazakallah khair from me and from Right Honourable Claudia